Good to go. Great, thank you. Welcome back to Senate Education. It's 3:32 on March 16th, day before St. Patrick's Day. We asked some of our colleagues, some of our advocate colleagues to take a stab at some new language for Section 4 so we could just have on our plate, a good understanding before the committee makes its final decision. So with that, Mr. Schilling, thank you, and thanks to Ms. Garces and Ms. Seelig for thinking this through, and tell us what you would like to see.
All right. So once again, for the record, my name is Walter Schilling. I'm the advocacy director for the ACLU of Vermont. So our proposed changes focus once again just on Section 4.
Yeah.
And looking at that section, what we would propose is that on line 15 of sub A on page 4, you would insert after independent school that utilizes a threat assessment or safety team. Except I think we heard that there's different terminology for those, and then delete and then include shall, and then delete from appoint to shall at the end of line 17.
So delete
Appoint a behavioral threat assessment team proposed of yada yada. So it's basically saying every supervisory union that utilizes or independent school that utilizes a threat assessment or safety team shall ensure members of the team receive training at least annually in best practices of conducting behavioral threat assessments as well as bias training. And then the other suggestion we had was that possibly adding a new sub B below that and saying that we would ask an entity, our first thought and short notice was that to assure that that training meets adequate standards. And I think the proposal we thought of without talking to them would be the Office of Racial Equity would determine what training would meet adequate standards for anti-bias training. And those are our proposed changes.
committee,
Can I ask for clarification?
please.
My sense is that a safety team is not the same as a threat assessment team, right?
Seems to be different.
Right. Yeah, I thought a safety team was, just a different entity, just more broad, and threat assessment was really targeted, right?
That might.
Seems like we're conflating the two maybe in this, in what you said.
Yeah, I can see that, and others can speak to that, but I guess as you look at how that agrees with the language later in the section, it does call for data collection specifically on threat assessments. So I'll let my other folks speak to if they'd be okay with changing that to just threat assessment, but I could see that concern there.
Ms. Garces.
My concern about codifying the threat assessment team again goes back to that, right? It's like what are we trying to look at? And I think that if the legislature wants to put a threat assessment team, this is the opportunity to learn about, like, through the data collection, what that is. And I think Ms. Seelig has like a better presentation about that. But I think that it goes to this idea that what we want to ensure is that we are looking at safety teams that have all these other views around our kids versus looking at our kids as threats, right? Like, we don't want to look at our kids as threats. We want to see our kids as needing support. And that's what a safety team brings, not what a threat.
Senator Weeks.
So I think to Senator Goulett's point that there's a safety team and then there's an escalation when there's a threat. This is the whole idea.
Why does it have to be two different teams, right?
But
Why do you have two different levels?
Please,
Sorry.
No, please.
Sorry.
Senator Williams, I see you.
Every time, every situation is different. So it's going to involve different people. They may have different additional teams within that school, depending on what the threat is. It's not every situation is going to affect this classroom or that classroom. So and they need to know, somebody's got to be the quarterback, calling the plays. This is the situation. That's And that quarterback is the one that has to interface with law enforcement in order for them to intervene if they have to.
Yes.
I think Ms. Seelig has the answer for that, because we just talked
Well,
about.
let's have Senator Hashim first. Senator Hashim?
I do think Dee actually had her hand up before me, or would you rather I just go first?
You won the seat. I'm gonna let you go
Okay,
first.
all right, gotcha. I mean, my question is, are we creating two teams or just changing the name of the team? Because from what it almost feels like we're just trying to just go over semantics almost at this point, and I'm not, and it's probably just gone over my head, but I'm just unclear as to what the substantive changes are at this moment with what's proposed. And yeah, if there's any clarification there, that would be great.
Go ahead. So as I understand it, what section 4 would now say is basically whether or not you're calling it a safety team or a threat assessment team, there's likely some overlap between what they both are probably doing. So let's just, and whether you have one or the other, what we would be doing is requiring that certain training happens while also making certain that over the next year, we start to collect data around what's happening in different schools, whether it's safety teams or threat assessment teams, and then taking that data and then making maybe a more informed decision upon return.
Got it. So the real substantive change is essentially creating a study is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, yes, I would say it would not mandate that every school yes, it would not mandate that every school have a behavioral assessment team, nor would it mandate every school have a safety team. We heard a little bit from Jay Nichols, just paraphrasing. I'm guessing every school probably has something out there, and we would be pulling together what they have and collecting some data around how it's working.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Felix.
Really quickly, Mr. Senator Williams' question. I do think the administrator in this scenario is the quarterback. I
You mean like the principal or dean of students, that
yeah,
person?
I mean, they're all, no matter what, they're gonna be looped into what's happening.
And the
So,
ones I've talked to, take that
yeah,
role,
right.
seriously.
That's what I wanted to say.
Senator Weeks, what are you thinking? I interrupted you before.
I'm listening.
So committee really, please.
May I please ask, read your statement one more time, a little more slowly? With the new language.
Yes, so I think what we were planning to insert would be after independent school on line 15.
Would you mind reading that whole paragraph?
Yes, each supervisory union or supervisory district in each approved independent school that utilizes a threat assessment or safety team, and I think we can check, I'm sure we can refine the language, shall ensure members of the team receive training at least annually in best practices of conducting behavioral threat assessments as well as bias training. And then the proposed sub under that would be the Office of Racial Equity to determine what trainings meet adequate standards.
It's not the standards for anti-bias.
I mean, that can be wordsmithed a little bit better, but that is,
Okay.
and those are the two proposed changes.
So what I think, let me paraphrase, what I think you said was that for every, again, I'm just going to paraphrase, school, just the union district or independent school that utilizes, but isn't the whole point is we're trying to ensure that they codify this threat assessment team or this team is in existence prior to the threat to the school?
That is what the original bill put forward, the draft, yeah. Ms. Barbic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify a few things. A safety team and a behavioral threat assessment team are two different entities. The two, you know, using one name in the place of another, they've two different purposes. They're two different entities. So I just want to clarify that. Secondly, I believe possibly Senator Williams just mentioned, I may have couldn't see very well who said this, but the purpose of this is to ensure that each school district has a team and that there's consistency. There's consistency across school districts. There's consistency in the training. So that, you know, I just want to be clear that, you know, the purpose here is part of the purpose is for that consistency. We understand that there are a number of districts that currently have behavioral threat assessment teams. Some also have safety teams as well. But what we'd like to see is that we have this available to all of our school districts across the state. So I did want to clarify that.
Ms. Barbic, how many schools roughly have threat assessment teams already up and going?
I
You
don't.
can be as general as 50% or a lot or very few. Any idea? And Ms. Seelig, do you know the answer to that question? Okay, Ms. Barbic.
And I don't know the exact answer, Mr. Chair. I think there are some, it's hard to quantify because there are some schools that have an individual team and there are some districts that have a district-wide team. So that would cover several schools. So again, there isn't necessarily consistency. And, you know, part of this, you know, the data collection would be helpful in establishing that, as would the mandated training that is in the language as it exists. Would also help us identify that as well.
Mr. Schilling, knowing that there are a lot out there already, or some, would you propose a bill that would dismantle those, or are you really just concerned that the police are involved at the level that's being proposed in this current draft? You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm trying to.
Yeah, no,
because again, all of a sudden we could, you know, all of a sudden you could have every district in Vermont have, you know, start this process on their own, and you could have every school, we could come back and find out everybody's already doing it. I mean, would you then come to the legislature as the ACLU person and say, gosh, we need to dismantle these, or would you be just concerned about that police piece?
Possibly. And I think part of this is
Okay.
the data collection. I think that's, I mean, the model that is in place and some of the guidance we've seen is what is making this troubling for us. And that's what's bringing this concern forward, is what that might mean. One, if we're requiring it in schools across the state, and we understand that these teams exist now, but I think in terms of making an informed decision, understanding how those teams are working, if there's bias that is playing out in those threat assessments, which is exactly the data that this calls for right now. So I think this, in some ways, from our perspective, is the middle ground on our position. But I think we do have concerns about the model. And, you know, in discussion with other colleagues, there has been calls for saying this should be prohibited. But I think in terms of this bill right now, we would see this as a positive step forward to not require, but to get more data so people can make more informed decisions.
And it does strike me, it makes the most sense. I'm looking at you, Ms. Garces. If we were to do the data collection, I mean, doing the school safety teams, I think we keep it the focus just on the behavioral. That's what we're trying to kind of get some data on.
Well, I don't think we would change, sorry, as we look at this more, this section would require that both safety teams and threat assessment teams receive training. And then later on, it specifically requires data on threat assessment, all behavior threat assessments and manifestation determination reviews. So that doesn't change the data collection requirement piece at the end. That's really modifying the training requirement, in my understanding.
Good point. Senator Buick.
I know Rachel.
Yeah, Ms. Seelig, I would ask for new information. If you're going to repeat something, at this point, you know where we're at. New information.
New information.
Please.
So for the record, Rachel Seelig, Disability Law Project Director, Vermont Legal Aid, and I apologize, I can't be there with you all in person today, but you would not want me coughing on all of you.
No.
So I think a couple of things that I would add is that I have not seen evidence that convinces me that behavioral threat assessment teams are actually accurate in predicting behavioral threat risk. And so for me, that's a big reason to get to this compromise language that we're presenting to you, is to not put the legislative stamp of approval on these teams at this point, and really collect data on whether they are actually effective. And even if they are, whether the consequences for children's civil rights are so great that they are still not something that you would want to say you approve of. So that to me is really the core of getting to this language of requiring the training for districts and schools that use these teams, but not at this point mandating these teams. And I think that's a point that hasn't been raised yet. And I think it really goes back to what I've talked with you all about before, which is that when we look at exclusionary discipline, we see significant disproportionality there. And for the most part, the issues that are leading to school discipline are not things that I think we would consider to be behavioral threats. And, you know, that term is still not defined in this statute. And so I think that is, you know, another area of ambiguity is what even would you all be comfortable with having be considered a behavioral threat that would justify the use of these threat assessment teams. So that's my addition to the conversation.
So to an earlier point, I think that the superintendent or the principal, whatever level this is being deliberated at, is in a position where they feel uncomfortable and they elevate the threat. They elevate the scenario to a threat, a perceived threat. And then this team comes together to begin to analyze it. I think that's the whole point of this, is that when that particular individual feels uncomfortable, then it becomes becomes a more formal process at a higher level that would involve law enforcement. I mean, that's the whole point.
That's already what's happening. That already happens.
But it doesn't necessarily happen everywhere. All
right.
So you know, so this came out of the Vermont School Safety. You know, I know I don't know the right.
Yeah, I don't know.
So it's Dee's organization. I mean, this is, so clearly they thought that there was disparity across Vermont schools, and that this is a tool to have ready in case of an adverse threat scenario. Something's happened. You can't create this team tomorrow when the threat's today. The whole point is to have a certain level of readiness, and I believe that's the intent of what the School Safety Council or committee or what have you is develop this language in the first place.
So I'm sorry, did you want to speak, Senator Williams?
Oh, listen.
Okay. So the civilians in the picture are already doing this work.
We think. That's the issue here, is that we set policy, and we want to make sure everybody has a team, whether it's threat assessment or a reactionary team, and that's what we're telling them to do. We're talking, the semantics part comes in about telling them what they have to do. The threat is subjective.
Okay.
It depends on what you think is a threat versus me.
So can I make a suggestion that was previously submitted to us, but just to take law enforcement out of the language here? And moreover, I do want to say, I really like the safety teams. I think the safety teams sound like a holistic approach. We've talked about them before. They seem to be doing a good job already from what we've heard, the testimony we've heard. A lot of us are uncomfortable with otherizing and stigmatizing and shaming kids. And if law enforcement is, exactly. Yeah. And if law enforcement is the issue here, then we take them off of the behavioral threat assessment team and use them when as needed, as required by what is already being used in schools around threats. Does that make sense to people?
It does, but I don't agree with it.
Okay.
Because if they're not involved with the training, and then they're not gonna interface when the time comes that they need.
If they haven't pre-engaged with the other members of the team, law enforcement isn't already familiar with the players, then they're already several steps behind. You know, the point is, it's just like it's like the fire drills, which are in the first part of this film.
Well,
You know, you gather, you practice, you learn. And that doesn't happen tomorrow when it's today.
again, I feel like we're making decisions with incomplete information, because my sense is that law enforcement is in touch with administrations in schools on a regular basis. That they know each other and that they, again, well, I don't know, okay, so see this is the incomplete information that we should have.
And so what I'm thinking, and I'm just gonna think ahead to my Bobby Starr lesson, what can we get 16 votes on? Can we get 20 votes on? Can we get 30 votes on? My gut is that if we bring it as drafted to the floor, it doesn't pass, frankly, just gonna be honest. I think the only way we bring something to the floor and it moves forward is some kind of additional, and people can disagree with me, and some additional data collection. I think if it comes up that the Human Rights Campaign,
Commission.
I'm sorry, Ms. Carson, and others have concerns about whether, or if there's data out there that in any way would indicate that behavioral threat assessment programs aren't working, that they're jeopardizing kids, all of that, it's gonna die. I mean, it's gonna die on the floor, and it's gonna get messy. So my suggestion would be to take, at this point, and I'm not saying we have to vote on it, and I get that it might not be unanimous, but to get something through, I do believe that I don't mean in a negative way, have to, but I think what would be most successful is if we take a look at the language that the two of you actually see the language, and then sort of reassess and kind of go from there. It's my gut.
Need a motion.
No, I think we just need to kind of talk about that and see what people are thinking.
If we get a new draft.
Oh, we would get a new draft. We would get a new draft. Senator Hashim.
I feel like getting a new draft and taking a moment, the whole committee taking a break from this conversation and then returning to it in a little while after we've had some time to digest and think about all these different aspects, I think they could be a good approach. I mean, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
I think you're right, and I think we'll get a new draft. Ledge Council isn't available right now. We'll have Ledge Council draft something up, and we will take a look at it. I don't expect we'll see new language today, but we have an afternoon tomorrow to spend together before we leave. We have an afternoon to try to move something, and this seems like it is the one question that's still out there, is that section 4. You did have an opportunity to at least glance at the section, at the template that Senator Hewlett referenced.
I did literally glance at it,
Yeah.
but I think my colleague Rachel Seeley is more familiar with it if there's some questions about it. But in terms of the proposal bringing forward to you right now is just the changes to section 4.
Okay, unless yeah.
Thank you.
Pet peeve would be tomorrow having concerns with sections 1, 2, and 3. See, I should say that would not happen.
We will not look at it.
I think we all know where sort of we are right now with this, so we'll ask Ms. St. James to draft new language. Anything else for today on this or another topic? I'll just close by saying that we don't know where S56 is quite yet, right? No, okay. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, thanks, everybody. I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll look forward to seeing you possibly tomorrow. Yeah,
Happy to join you.
thanks.